This session is going to be on how generational curses can jump and become a soul tie. So what I want you to look at is generational curses we know can be like suicide, divorce, different things like that. A soul tie spirit is when we're in a relationship with somebody and we inherit their demons. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in another session. But what I want you to think about with a generational curse, think about your son-in-laws, your daughter-in-laws, maybe even yourself or your client that you're ministering to. Are you seeing the son-in-law act a way that your daughter would act or that you would act? Or a disease manifest? I'll give you an example. I was ministering to a man once that had ALS. And he was married, then he divorced, and he met his high school sweetheart a couple years later. Her mom had ALS. And he was healthy his whole life. So they get married, the high school sweethearts. They're now like 50, 55 years old, and they get married. Her mom's dying from ALS. Her mom dies. Demons go out back into the atmosphere. They do not die with a person. And he contracts within 6 months ALS. It's a generational curse, jumps to a soul tie. So he was coming in for ministry to a lot of different ministries to get healed, to, get delivered and get rid of this. But every time he went home, she's like, well, my mom died from this. You'll probably die. So her words were canceling out the progress that we would see each time. So 2 years later, he dies of ALS. Now, that's a very easy example that I showed you, just so you can see how this happens. Now, I want to show you one a little bit more in depth. I worked with this family. I delivered the entire family, and I got permission to use this example and these charts that I'm operating from. But the first person here, we're going to say the head of the household, he committed suicide. All right. Then his son commits suicide. His other son has a premature death and he has alcoholism. His third son commits suicide and his daughter dies an early death from the flu. So I think he had like 9 kids. 4 of them die, premature deaths. So the second generation, the son has 2 death attempts on him. Now this son I knew, I ministered to him. He had cancer that he got healed from, and he had a freak accident where a brick fell on his head. Okay? So the death spirit did not take him out, but it attacked him. The son dies at 40 years old. The daughter has a death attempt on her life and becomes mentally challenged. The other daughter has a husband whose death was attempted, a freak accident, becomes mentally challenged. Now here, it was the daughter's husband. So there's the soul tie entrance. You see? So by 2 generations, this is so severe that now we have a soul tie. Now in the 3rd generation, his son dies at 2 years old from a car rolling over him while his wife was sleeping. And I say that because there's a sleeping generational curse here. So the wife is sleeping, the 4-year-old daughter is watching the 2-year-old son, car rolls over it, dies. The daughter has 4 death attempts on her life. And the only reason she's alive is because we went and delivered her. She had freak accidents, she had cancer, she had unexplained sickness. There was one time I got in my car and I drove to another state within 24 hours notice to save her life. Okay, so the death, it just kept coming. Now, this man in this generation remarries, and there's death spirits on his wife. Again, the soul tied to the family. His daughter has a freak accident and becomes mentally challenged. You see, so that mentally challenged is now coming down. That whole generation was one of the generations that we went in and delivered. The daughter is no longer mentally challenged, off medication, living on her own. I talked about that in another session. Now the fourth generation, the lady marries a husband. He dies at 40 years old. That's an unnatural, untimely death, soul tie, connect. Her son has a spirit of suicide, and both her and her son, remember in the previous generation, the mom was sleeping so much that the kid got rolled over by the car. She usually gets up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and her sons were going to college, 2 of them, and they had this sleep generational curse that they had to attend nighttime college because they couldn't get up even to do something before noon. Her second son tries to commit suicide several times. Her daughter's boyfriend, the father of her daughter's children, tries to attempt suicide. Again, that soul tie, connect. So when we don't break those generational curses off to the level that we need to break them off, then what happens is they can, I'm not saying they always can, it happens, but they can become a soul tie. And so now you haven't just had your immediate family that you have to deal with, but you have boyfriends, you have the spouses, and these spirits, don't know any respecter of persons, and so they'll just go into anyone, and now your problem has accelerated. So that's one of the most important reasons that I could say, get your generational curses out and your client's generational curses out so that they don't have the soul tie happenings, and then you have more deliverance on your hand than necessary. And like I said, we're going to talk about soul ties more in another session.